Nepal is a protagonist of an exemplary process of achieving peace. And second, Nepal is the second contributor in the world to peacekeeping. The visit to Nepal is very important when we are preparing a set of proposals to the General Assembly of the United Nations called the New Agenda for Peace. We need to strengthen our capacity in prevention and mediation. And you have seen how important it is in the context of Nepal. We need to make sure that in peacekeeping operations we do not go on having peacekeeping operations where there is no peace to keep, but that we improve our peacekeeping operations, but at the same time that we make the international community understand that in several conflict situations in the world, we do not need peacekeepers, we need peace enforcers. We need people able to fight terrorist organizations that are working there. And this is not the vocation of the UN, but it's the vocation of the African Union, for instance. And we need to create conditions for regional organizations to assume their responsibilities, but of course with mandates from the Security Council, with clear respect for international humanitarian law and human rights, and at the same time with financing guaranteed by the international community. And a lot of other aspects in our agenda for peace. Now we have artificial intelligence. It's important not to allow weapons that are able to choose their targets without human agency. It's important to avoid that artificial intelligence transforms itself into a new arms race, like the one we had in relation to nuclear weapons. Disarmament will be in the center of our agenda for peace. So there are many aspects in our quest for peace in this world full of conflicts that are inspired by Nepal, and in which this visit to Nepal has a very important meaning. The second existential problem that we are facing in the world is climate change. And this is the first of two visits that I will do before the COP. One, to see the glaciers of the Himalayas. The second, to see Antarctica, where the loss of ice every year is absolutely appalling. And when coming to the glaciers of the Himalayas, and I hope that the video that we have recorded is already everywhere in the world, is it? Telling the world that we absolutely must stop this craziness. We must put severe limits in emissions, and at the same time, we must increase substantial resources to support countries in adaptation and resilience, and to create the loss and damage fund. Because here in Nepal, we see the two aspects. Nepal does not contribute to climate change, but Nepal is in the first line of impact, that negative impact of climate change. And it was important to show the world the glaciers receding, the consequences in the terrible floods, in the landslides, in the communities being dramatically impacted by a country that is innocent. So the innocents are paying the price for what the bad guys are doing. And this is totally unacceptable. And it had to be said with Himalayas behind me. And it will be said again in a few weeks in Antarctica, where we are witnessing a dramatic loss of ice with the rising sea levels and with all the consequences that you can imagine. Now, it is our duty to show Nepal to the world, for the world to understand how dramatic is our present situation in relation to climate. And Nepal is an important example, because Nepal, as I said, doesn't contribute to climate change, but Nepal is a first-hand victim of the impacts of climate change. And so we'll be fighting in the COP. We'll be fighting for much tougher reductions of emissions. We'll be fighting for developed countries to put at disposal of developing countries what they have promised, to double the contributions for adaptation, to put in place the loss and damage fund, and to do many other aspects that are not solidarity, that are not generosity, are just to do what they are supposed to do their duty because those that have polluted are the ones that now need to reduce pollution and at the same time to support the victims of the pollution that they have created. And so, this very strong campaign in relation to climate action will have Nepal as its starting point on our way to COP in Abu Dhabi. If Nepal is able to adopt a very effective strategy to be able to compete internationally and to be able to take profit of those two gigantic markets. So Nepal has a chance. And it is our duty as UN staff members, and in particular of the Nepalese that working for the UN, to do everything possible to make sure that Nepal is successful. To do everything possible to make sure that the peace process is entirely consolidated and that a true reconciliation takes place. To make everything possible for the country to have a development strategy based on the Sustainable Development Goals and be able to do it in a way in which people benefit, that is people-centered, not centered on economic interests, sometimes of doubtful nature, and in which we can support the country to, as quickly as possible, become a middle-income country. And at the same time, to support Nepal in the context, geographic context in which Nepal is, to take as much profit as possible of its location, of its neighborhood, and not to become a victim of that location and that neighborhood. And then being sure that in relation to what I saw today in the Himalayas, the UN will be in the front line to support the Nepalese government and the Nepalese people to build resilience, to make the investments necessary to resist the negative impacts of climate change, and at the same time to be able to redesign and reorient many of its policies in order to take into account the already inevitable impacts that climate change will have.